Welcome back, everybody, to Marketing Rules Podcast, and it's my pleasure to welcome Toby Culsaw. Toby, for those who don't know you, where have they been? Because you're pretty ubiquitous within the kind of talent attraction space. But for those who don't know, maybe you could give us a little bit about your background, what you do now, and a little bit around the Talent Intelligence Collective as well, which we're going to expand a little bit on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, firstly. So I've been in the recruitment, RPO, headhunting, research space for 20-something years. Started day dot agency side, big red book in the accounting search world, and you literally go down this big red book looking for newly qualified accountants and then pick up the phone, try and headhunt them out their practice firms. Right through to running searches, big RPOs and squads for call centers and stuff. And then probably in the last 10 years or so, I really went from that sourcing side of things and driving direct search, trying to get earlier and earlier in the decision-making funnel. And we realized that through sourcing, you can impact some of the output and you can impact the requisition and the feasibility of that requisition. But by that stage, it's too late. You're trying to just pick up the pieces of a bad decision somewhere. So I started down this track of, all right, how do I get earlier in this decision? We can explore all that sort of stuff. But that led me down the path of talent intelligence. And then for the last couple of years, I've been at Amazon. So I lead talent intelligence for worldwide Amazon stores, which is everything that essentially isn't AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, and it's not ads and devices, and it's not the army. So we have an army workforce staffing of like a million plus people we hire every year. I'm everything else. To the retail, logistics, robotics, warehousing, all that sort of bit. And then prior to this, I was over at Royal Philips, which is a Dutch health tech company, leading talent intelligence there. So I'm very much in the talent intelligence space, and that's what I'm enjoying at the moment. Hence, around the Talent Intelligence Collective and what we do there, and we can explore what that is and how it works and everything as well. But essentially, it's a group that I formed to try and have like-minded people that are trying to get into this space. It's a new space. We're all trying to find our way in the dark with it. So I thought, let's have a bit of a safe space where we can ask those stupid questions that we're scared to ask everywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, because the term kind of talent intelligence is kind of fairly new, and it is that fairly area that's kind of, I think, that's kind of growing. And I follow the collective. Obviously, I get the newsletter, and we'll kind of give all the details about that at the end. But it is, you seem to be the kind of the kind of the, I'm not going to say leader, but you're the one that's kind of pushing this as something that needs to have more kind of research into, needs to be kind of looked into, needs to have just more bodies behind, right? I mean, that's how I kind of see your role, right? And I think you're kind of, the forerunner of all this, really.
Oh, maybe I'm just noisier. I don't know. It's kind of just I am passionate about it, and the reason being is I think I mentioned prior life, as it were, was leading sourcing teams and running sourcing. I think fundamentally, when we brought sourcing in house, we messed up. The early days of sourcing was around high touch, high value service. It was cutting out external search firm fees. It was so reducing agency reliance, but it was all around high touch, high value, high cost, and it was that highly valued part of the process. Somewhere on the process, we messed up, and it became volume of activity and volume of hire. And so we ended up with this whole shift of sourcing from a real mindset piece of what we're trying to do is a problem-solving activity and a real challenge to a process activity. And you see that in the industry now, where I think you have a split between problem sources and process sources. Um, I don't want to mess up TI. I think it's the power and the potential is too important. So I want to try and influence as much as I can to help that along the way. Um, the vast majority of talent intelligence teams. So that's why I started the collective initially, was to say, let's have this space where we can talk about this stuff, try and make sure we're all pushing in the same direction, trying to develop the same sorts of tools and product and service offerings and everything else. And that kind of spiraled, and we do podcasts on it, we do newsletters on it, or a book on it. But it's broadly all trying to just drive the conversation and see where things are going. And there's some amazing people doing amazing things, but it can be lonely because quite often you're in very small teams, individual contributors, or the vast majority of teams are sub 5 people, and you're pulled in all different directions. And you can sit there thinking, I don't feel like there's anybody internally that really gets what I do. So having a bit of a community around that can be really, really powerful. So for me, none of it works without the community. It's all driven. I might have kind of set some of this stuff up, but it's driven by the community. It's driven by the people that share their time, share their resources, share their expertise. So it's really as a community piece. But I think it's fascinating how it's all changing. Like the term itself.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Right? I mean, the term itself is fairly kind of new into the space, and it was like, well, when you were kind of moving in this direction, did did you know that that's what you were? You were in talent intelligence. Did you have to define it? I mean, how did you kind of know that that's what you were moving into?
Yeah, it's a great question. Early days, I'd say no. I didn't know what this name was and what it meant. The name itself's been around for 20, 30 years, and there's some great people that have done some amazing things. You've got companies called Talent Intelligence Group, etc. There's some amazing people that have done some stuff around talent intelligence, but I think historically it was really just relied. The majority of work internally was looking at what I'd call now sourcing intel, so helping recruiters recruit better, and that's got sourcing intel at a rec level, exec research, and competitive intelligence. That was kind of the main areas people got stuck into. I think the big difference really happened for me when some of the vendors started changing their platforms, and it went from vendors being very data heavy, and you had to be really quite data literate to use those toolings and to actually work them. Um, Having a much better user interface and doing a lot of that heavy lifting vendor side, which meant Luddites like me could jump on these platforms and go, this makes sense to me. I don't have to do all the statistical analysis. I don't have to do the forecasting. It's all built into the platform and hard baked in, which means I can then use this data to then consult internally. That's left though now is you've got this there's still a lot of variance where you see vendors using one definition of talent intelligence, and it's often more around talent management analytics and skills based analytics. And you see a lot of the practitioners with big capital T, capital I that have it as part of their job title. I am a talent intelligence, whatever, that is essentially usually look at it going, well, I'm doing external labor market feasibility or competitive analysis or whatever it may be. But then you have individuals with small t, small I that are doing the action of talent intelligence that quite often do it off the side of a desk. And they could be in people analytics, they could be in strategic workforce planning, they could be in TA. There's a number of different areas they could be where it's kind of a byproduct, a side piece of their day job. So you definitely are still seeing a lot of variance, and I'd almost say it's like the Wild West, where you've got all the freedom to explore, you've got all the freedom to roam, and there's no one that's really kind of putting down those stakes in the ground to say these are the delineation. This is what you can do. This is what you can't do. There's a huge amount of freedom, but with that comes a huge amount of risk and a huge amount of instability, because that freedom and goes for everything. It goes from our product offering, it goes from the data sources, it goes from across everything. So you can have a number of TI teams that you look at and go, yep, job description looks the same. When you dig into what they're doing, completely different work. And you have many teams that don't look anything like each other once you start digging into what people actually do.
And when it comes to the collective, is that reflected in the membership that there's people from kind of this kind of slightly, I'm not going to say disparate, but I mean,
Mm.
slightly, where it's not really, particularly concise exactly if they are all doing the same things, but they're in a similar roundabout area. Is that the membership kind of breakdown as well?
100%. Yeah, 100%. So we had people in there, everything from kind of core TI professionals that people do this day in, day out for the job. You have lots of people where it's a side part of the job. You have people in HR, you have people in strategy, you have people in competitive intelligence, you have external vendors, you have internal consultants, you have a huge range within there. And and you have various stages of maturity through all that as well, and then various stages of data maturity as well. So you have some people that are very vendor led, and they're just tied in and they're doing the consulting internally. Have other people with entire data engineering teams and business intel engineers and data analysts and data scientists, and a huge range within there as well. And it's still very new. People are posing questions daily that you look at and go, never faced that. Don't know how you do that one. So there's a lot of problem solving of what are the data sets we could use to try and solve this problem, or what could we use as a proxy for that data set if that doesn't exist. You see that often with DE&I data, where people will get DE&I data from the US and go, great, how can we use this rest of the world? And you think, well, no one else is capturing that data. Well, where do you think we'd get this data from? So there's a lot of problem solving still within TI, but it's the variance is huge. You have teams that could be working on anything from TA and rec level stuff through the whole of the HR TA life cycle, talent life cycle, right through to hardcore M&A activity and competitive intelligence and acqui-hiring, and there's a huge amount of variance within that.
And is that one of the reasons why you kind of you started the collective in the first place? It was kind of, is it because you were wanting some of these questions answered, and it felt the need to kind of just kind of have a group think basically around all of this to say, right, well, who else is doing this? And I don't know if I've got the answers, but someone else might.
Yeah, absolutely. So that naturally, people that are drawn to this sort of work are usually quite data led. So when I first started the role at Philips, I was looking at it going, I kind of think I know where I want to drive this, and I know where my bosses want me to take this. But what does good look like in this space? So I started reaching out to people that were doing something similar, and I started having a quarterly call with a few leaders in this space, um, just to keep in touch and say, okay, what are you doing? How does that look? What does that look like? And some amazing people, and I won't name drop them because it's unfair to them, but there's some amazing folks out there that they'll know who I'm talking about. Um, and it very quickly came to be that I realised I really am not good at arranging quarterly calls. There were no agendas. The diary management was a nightmare, and so I was like, "Look, should I create some kind of online group where we don't have to wait quarter to quarter? If we've got questions, we can just chuck it in there. We can answer each other. But also, the pressure's then not on me actually creating an agenda every single month or quarter. We can just chat as and when." So that's why I started the Facebook group initially, and it's just kind of taken off and spiraled from there. But originally, yeah, it was I just need to know what good looks like in this space and who's doing what, and because it was all new, it was all new territory, and I'd seen it very much from a sourcing and a sourcing intel and exec research background, and I'd seen it from that side, but I didn't know how that tied into strategic workforce planning or to people analytics, or how does this all fit in the bigger picture. So yeah, originally it was purely selfish. I just wanted to know what everyone else is doing and how that works, and I was too useless at creating a proper quarterly agenda on a call to keep things going. So it was purely selfish.
And do you find that there are lots of kind of regional or location differences, or is it really like you kind of mentioned? Is it kind of more kind of business and company led? Where the bigger businesses, they've got the resources for this, so they're the ones who are kind of who have a more bigger teams, they have a bit more expertise in this. Or do you find that you've also got people within the collective that are smaller teams, just kind of very enthusiastic and but they're dotted all around the world, or is it kind of like it's all really Europe focused, or it's all US focused, or what's the kind of breakdown, kind of location wise?
Yeah, great question. I'd say so. I as part of the TIT, we do a benchmarking survey, and we do it every year. And so I've seen it change year after year as well. You're still seeing the vast majority net number of individuals doing talent intelligence based in India. And that largely came from the vendor landscape. So a lot of the vendors had large TI analyst teams in Bangalore and Pune and Gurgaon, etc. So you had a huge number of practitioners there. You've seen a lot of the internal teams being set up in the US, and then with Europe following. You generally in larger tech companies, but it's definitely moved out from that rather rapidly. Essentially, it's companies that are going through change and transformation, and obviously, the last few years, a lot of companies have faced that. So we've definitely seen a big pickup of companies in the last couple of years. Seen a big pickup also from the RPO side of things. So a lot of the RPOs are looking at it going, well, actually, we can pivot and build these new teams. Um, there's still a huge overemphasis of these teams in talent acquisition functions,
Mhm.
and by and large, the vast majority of teams are in TA. It's over 70%, and yet 80% of them don't think TA is the right home for TI. So you're seeing a lot of the teams are stretched within TA and saying, well, actually, a lot of this work that I'm doing is for other functions, or the work I'm doing is longer term thinking, but TA isn't necessarily giving me the route to customer internally that I need. So I think that's an interesting evolution going. But yeah, geographically, mainly US, Europe, and India. And I'm massive generalizations there. Industry wise, mainly tech. Once again, massive generalizations.
So coming back to that kind of point, where what's the collective's kind of opinion on where TI should sit within an organization? Then, if it's not in the TA part.
Yeah, it's a real debate. It's a hot debate. There are some people that think that there should be a centralized people analytics function. So we obviously have a people analytics teams there at the moment, but a much broader people analytics function where you've got people analytics, talent acquisition analytics, strategic workforce planning, talent forecasting, talent intelligence, etc., etc. So you've got this full holistic view of talent and HR and workforce. So an expanded from current scope. Um, you've got other teams that think we should just lift and shift and just lift away and go under. Some see it still within HR, into the CHRO, into HR strategy, others into more commercial functions, so into competitive intelligence or into commercial or into operations sometimes. Um, Others also think that there's a case to say, actually, we need a centralized intelligence function. So bringing together talent intelligence, competitor intelligence, market intelligence, business intelligence, etc., and saying, well, actually, the skills are very, very similar across. You work in different mechanisms in different timelines, but in actual fact, if we want to know our true competitor stance, you can't understand a competitor unless you understand their people. You don't know what their go to market is unless you understand the people they're doing it. You don't understand how successful they're going to be on a bid for a new piece of work unless you know the program team that's within the organization and how they're looking to scale up. You don't know how they're looking to pivot as a company unless you understand the jobs they're hiring for and how they're looking to change skill sets or change location or change leveling or whatever it may be. So, yeah, there's definitely an argument to be made around a centralized intelligence function too.
And what about the other kind of hot topics that the collective are discussing? What's kind of, over the last kind of 6 months to a year, what are the other topics that you kind of have really kind of set fire to the collective and kind of come to the top?
Yeah, I think there's some ongoing bubbling things. So, the ability to grow teams and grow capability and capacity is an ongoing one. This is still a relatively new thing. As I mentioned, a lot of these teams are still based within talent acquisition. Particularly in the last year, TA's been beaten. We've seen a lot of layoffs happening. A lot of the TI teams have been hit with layoffs, etc. as well. So it's that ability to scale has been a real issue because the demand is there. Any change period, you need to understand what's the context of this change. So the demand on TI is been growing consistently, but we haven't seen the same levels of investment growth both from a tooling or a training or from a headcount perspective. So alternative ways of scaling. So whether that's rotation programs, whether that's bringing in interns, temporary labor, outsourcing, etc. Like there's lots of different ways of looking at that. Also pivoting the service offering. A lot of teams were built and geared up for growth and high growth. Suddenly, when you're not in that high growth environment, but you're looking at cost optimization, how does that change? How do you change your service offering accordingly? You may have been heavy on location strategy previously. Suddenly, you're not. You're looking at skills adjacency or skills taxonomies. How do you pivot that really, really fast? So we're seeing a lot of people that are looking at how do we keep agile and changing these skill sets and these service offerings, etc. And how are you doing that with a small team? The vast majority of teams are still sub 5 people. uh, each of these areas, you have really, really specialist skills. You have to have data engineering, you have to have data science or analytics. Like you have to have these specialist skills. So it's how do you either build these or leverage vendor environments to say, how can I partner more effectively to get some of this data? How do I partner internally with different teams to get some access to some of these skills to do this stuff? So yeah, I'd say doing more with less, and then looking at how we pivot service offerings has been kind of the core themes.
And where do you see the future of the collective kind of going as it sits in a minute? I know you said there's a collective itself. It's got this kind of this community. There is the newsletter. There is the podcast. There's the conference. I know you run. What else can you kind of squeeze into this without making yourself kind of giving yourself too much work, basically?
Yeah, yeah. A lot of it is the time aspect. I've got a day job as well, so that keeps me pretty busy, as you'd imagine. Amazon do like to keep their workers fairly busy, so fairly busy with a day job. But there's still a lot more I'd like to do. I think the conference we did a virtual conference last year. We're doing a partner with Intelligence Group and Strategens to do an in-person conference in Amsterdam this year. I'd still like to do more in-person stuff. So whether that's more conferences in other locations, also I'd like to do more meetups and have that as a more regular thing. Physical meetups, we do monthly meetups already virtually. We do monthly deep dives as well virtually, but I'd like to do more in-person stuff. I'd also like to do more official training. I think there's a big hole at the moment where, as an industry, we don't have that set standard, and I think sourcing. You saw a couple of vendors come through. The guys at Social Talent did an amazing job at their e-learning programs for sourcing. There isn't really something specifically for TI at the moment, and I'd like to build that together and build some kind of accredited program. Having said that, that's been on my to-do list for about 3 years now. So that's quite a big one. I had the book on my to-do list. We got the book done. The book's out. I might have to rename it because I'm not convinced talent intelligence is the right name for us all in the future. So I might have to rename the book at some point. But I think that's out there. I think an accredited learning program would be useful as well.
And that brings me on to pretty much my last question, Toby. Is the future of talent intelligence? You've already mentioned one that it might not necessarily be called talent intelligence. Maybe that is the wrong term. Um, what does the future hold for people in your space?
Yeah, I'm not convinced talent intelligence is the right term, which really my publishers won't be keen on that one if I have to rename the book.
You just have to
um,
write another one, basically. You know what I mean?
how hard could it be? Did it once. Just control, or we'll just change the word talent to something else. I'm not convinced talent is the right name, and the reason being is I think talent as a phrase, talent intelligence, when you use it, it restricts your mindset to the talent life cycle. And yes, that is a huge aspect of this. Whether you're looking at talent acquisition analytics, talent management analytics, what skills adjacencies, etc., potential future employee base, etc., etc. Talent absolutely is a core part of this, but absolutely so is the broader workforce. And it gets into semantics of talent versus workforce versus labor market, whatever. You can split hairs on this stuff, but I think there is a positioning piece where when people, particularly internally, when they hear the words talent, they're narrowing their thinking instantly. And a lot of the work that people do, nothing to do with the talent. It's nothing to do with the individual. It's looking at much more broader labor market economics piece or competitive intelligence piece. I think there's probably some period of consolidation of phrases and namage and teams with that as well. So whether we're all merging into people analytics and like we discussed earlier, or whatever that may be, I think there's probably some room there. I think the biggest piece I'm seeing at the moment is there's a lot of pressure on strategic workforce planning at the moment, and building out the strategic workforce planning capabilities. I think TI is one of the elements that SWP's kind of been missing for a few years. They've been very strong at operational planning and internal planning, but that long-term strategic piece, I think teams have really struggled on that longer context and that longer time frame. TI helps with that. It really gives that external context of, okay, this is what you're going to be facing over that next 5-year period. If this is where you're trying to get to, this is the context to see whether that's even feasible or not. So I could see as a first step towards a broader consolidation. I think SWP and TI will get much closer. What that means for TI teams based within TA, I don't know, because I think there still is a need for sourcing intel and for an improved ability for recruiters to have analytics and intelligence capabilities and intel at their fingertips as well. So I think there still is a need for that, but I think the broader customer base is cooling and cooling quite loudly. And if we don't take that ground, I think other teams and functions will take that ground.
Yeah. And what about the kind of technological changes that might kind of affect how you guys do your work? Surely, I shudder to use the dreaded word AI, but I'm sure there's a lot of discussion around that amount and that how that's going to kind of impact on your work.
Yeah, I've gone through. I guess it's like the stages of grief almost. You go through like the fear we're all going to get automated. Um, I don't think we will all get automated. I think the reality is for most of this stuff, if you're really average at your job and you're adding no value and you're just a processor, as in you're doing a process, then yeah, you probably will get automated, and you probably should be automated. Um, I think if you're adding value, then there's always going to be space for you. And I think you're probably going to see a lot of TI teams augmented with generative AI, etc. Um, in a good way. I think it lowers the barrier to entry for a lot of this stuff. I mentioned earlier, to do a lot of TI work, you're going to need data engineers, you're going to need data analysts. if AI can do that heavy lifting for you and you don't need that data engineering expertise or you don't need that data analytical expertise, you just need somebody that can almost mark the homework and say, well, actually, this just doesn't pass the smell, the sniff test. This feels fundamentally wrong. Um, if you can take that heavy lifting away, I think that's great. If you can suddenly build a friendly front end chatbot functionality or whatever it may be, so that recruiters can digest this information a lot easier, great. You can then scale across your TA teams a lot easier, and you don't have to have all those nice to have requests. You see that quite often in TI teams. The hardest piece at the beginning is that differentiation between a strategic priority and a nice to have request, because the nice to have requests can quite often be the loudest and the noisiest, but it's not actually what you should be focusing on. A lot of them can get addressed with having better generative AI tooling and self-service capabilities. Um, so yeah, I think there's a lot of work that can be done. Just thinking about, obviously this marketing rules podcast. Just think about recruitment marketing. If you can suddenly build generative AI, so you can say, well, actually, we can do some really targeted A/B testing on the imaging that we've just produced through Midjourney and the tone of voice work and the EVP work that we've just done through ChatGPT, analyzing all of our sentiment brand data or whatever it may be. Um, you can suddenly do some really interesting things that previously you'd have needed an army of people to do or very, very deep pockets to do. Um, and suddenly it's very, very approachable and you can
Yeah.
suddenly do some really interesting things.
Yeah, I think it's going to be kind of slightly leveling. I think that's the kind of, I think that's one of it. Toby, it's been an absolute pleasure listening to today. Obviously, we'll include all of your details in the show notes. So if anybody wants to know a bit more about what you do or wants to request to join the collective or know more about the collective, then they can kind of, we'll have all the links there. But for now, Toby, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great fun.